the Bain Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, Swinging Swords Playground Equipment Company hits a snag when silly children forget to sit on the flat of the blades. Contests of will, necessity, and silly affectation. Plus, we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Uncompromising Honor. All right now. Welcome to the Bain Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Bain Senior Editor Tony Daniel. This week we have part 2 of a roundtable with Michael Z. Williamson and several of the writers featured in the new anthology, Freehold Defiance. This is a collection of short stories set in Michael Z. Williamson's Freehold universe during the climax of the war between the libertarian-leaning world of Graine and Earth's underhanded and oleaginous United Nations. Along with Michael Z. Williamson, we have Kevin Ikenberry, Christopher and Jaime DiNote, and Phillip Wohlrab. And we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Now here's the news. Hey, it's the May Rubies and Rust Catherine Asaro ebook sale. To celebrate the mass market paperback publication of Catherine Asaro's The Vanished Seas, Bain eBooks has major discounts on all ebooks by Catherine Asaro. The Vanished Seas is the third book in Catherine Asaro's excellent science fiction and mystery series, featuring the tough Major Bajan, who hails from the deepest of planetary ghettos, but whose investigation into wrongdoings frequently shakes the highest levels of intergalactic empire. During May, get $2 off the ebook of The Vanished Seas and get $1 off all other Catherine Asaro ebooks, including The Bronze Skies, Undercity. These are part of the Major Bajan series, plus dollar discounts on Sunrise Alley, Diamond Star, and Carnelians. These are available wherever Bain ebooks are distributed. Sale ends May 31st, 2021 at the crack of June. This is part 2 of a 2-part roundtable discussion of Freehold Defiance. Part 1 is available in last week's podcast. Let's talk about, I want to get to Mike's stories, of course, but let's move to Fire in the Deep, Angel on the Wind by Christopher DiNote and Phillip Wohlrab. Are you still there, right, Doc?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, still here.
We can't see you, but your voice is here. So this is a cool long story that is, I think it's definitely novelette length. And it's about firefight, it's about fighting but it's also about just the dangerous nature of this world Mike has created as well, which is very cool. Tell us a little bit about what's going on at the beginning of it, and then
yeah.
So after that, yeah,
the very first pass of this story tied into one that was in the previous anthology, and it was basically going to be like the survivors of that unit egressing out of the area, and that didn't work out, and so we ended up moving them around on the planet. So it's a different unit, but it's still, you're still dealing with primarily British and Irish, primarily Irish peacekeepers that has an attached British medic. And so it opens up where, they're essentially getting the snot shot out of them, and their armored vehicles have all been shot to pieces, and this medic is trying to keep people alive while because she's essentially non-combatant. The way the medics are written in this from the UN perspective, they've reverted back to their Geneva Convention status, and they're not carrying firearms, so they're out there doing what they're supposed to do, which is
she doesn't even know how to use a dang rifle.
No,
in this.
yeah, she's never been trained on it. She's from, one of the I forget which British city I had her coming from,
I think you
but
said Birmingham.
yeah, she's never held a firearm in her life, and yet she's in the army, and so there's a little scene in the story where they hand her a rifle, and she's just like, I don't know what to do with this thing, and the Russian pilot has to basically coach her on how to use a firearm along with her sergeant. So Molly is, she's actually modeled on a couple of British Army medics that come out of the GWAT. Several have earned the Military Cross, and other very high awards.
Mentioned in dispatches, several of them.
Mm-hmm. And so, the reason why I crafted that character the way I did was kind of an homage to them. But from her viewpoint, you're seeing like the egress from hell that turns into the medevac from hell, because at one point they get shot down, and then her war is obviously trying to deal with the injuries that are going on, and then there are things literally trying to eat the survivors of the party. So it isn't so much it's a very much man versus nature story on the ground side, versus Chris half, which is the operations center piece, and getting people where they need to go and getting them out of Dodge. So it was interesting, having the two different viewpoints in the story.
Yeah, talk about that, Chris. So this is a bad situation where you've essentially lost, and you're trying to save what you can, right? And that still requires a certain sort of bravery and ability. In fact, maybe more so. And tell us what the heck this Russian secret thing, because that comes into the story, and it's an interesting detail that maybe is of interest to set up as well.
Sure. Just real quick, all the opinions that I express here are my own personal ones and do not represent the official position of the United States government, Department of Defense, or the United States Air Force. So just to give a little cover here. The Russian thing was actually a bit of a holdover from, like Phil said, the original pass that we did it, which was going to sort of be an immediate sequel to Phil's story in Resistance. And by immediate, we mean like seconds later. Like the final frame of that story was the opening frame of this one, the way it was kind of originally set up. But the Russian piece, holding on to that, was good because we had to set up a location where like all the normal assets the UN could have used to even prevent this they had to have a reason to not necessarily be available. So the point being is like all the conventional forces aren't allowed to operate in there. Mike has set it up in the past that on Graine, the UN fight, they tend to use Russian Spetsnaz equivalent in the future, or Russian private military contractor equivalent, we'll say, in the future, to go in and do the really dirty work. And the best way to do the really dirty work and get away with it is to keep everybody else, even your own side, from being able to see and affect and command and control what's going on in their assigned zone.
Actually, a lot of that was Doc. Doc set a lot of that up.
Yeah. In that previous story, the Spetsnaz, originally I'd written them as coming from Russia. I think we changed it to a Russian planet, or Russian themed planet. But
Russia.
Yeah, those guys were a real piece of work. And the thinking on that was, this is all the horror stories that came out of Russian involvement in Afghanistan in the 1980s. Some of the units that lost control there or were deliberately brutal. So these guys were way off the reservation, but the UN was using them because for very troubled areas that they had just lost control of, and no questions asked. And so, yeah, the Grainians did not like these guys, and they dealt with them in a very brutal fashion. And that was kind of the setup coming into this story. Like, you know, they're literally the screaming Russians in the background being, you know, butchered by the Grainians, because these guys had literally like set people on fire inside their homes, you know, without regards of were their children present or not. So nobody was treating these guys nobody was taking them prisoner. And so these 4 Irish peacekeepers and this British medic attached was, you know, fair game, at least originally from the Graine perspective. And that kind of held over into this story, even though the setting changed a bit from the previous anthology.
Mm. Well, what has happened that has led to this? It's sort of like a forward operating base sort of thing, right?
Pacification. A lot of it is trying to, area control and pacification. So, you know, they've got FOBs out there and they're launching, it's sort of like a combination at this point of doing counterinsurgency, also doing pacification or combat operations against the Grainian insurgents. So that's part of the reason why, too, we're looking at it from that immediate above tactical echelon higher headquarters. Is we set it up that there's a general counteroffensive going against Grainian forces. And that also kind of starts setting up the ambiguous side of the stage of the war going, hey, is the tide starting to turn here? Is the Freehold forces actually reaching some degree of parity? You know, it's kind of like it's a very nervous time for the UN. But, you know, the folks working there, we'll call it the conventional forces, are doing what they're supposed to do. We black out the special operations area and, oh, my God, what's going on over there? And then when they start peeking into it, they're like, you guys are doing what? And we have who, you know, it's that, oh, crap, you know, now we have to we got to do something about this and get these folks out of there. So, and it was actually fun, too, to make this a very Commonwealth heavy force, you know, to play around a bit, so to speak, with the Brits, the Irish and Russians, you know, both good and bad, by the way, good and bad Russians in this. So, you know, just so that we're not just treating them like stock villains necessarily. And it was really fun, I think, to watch Phil wrap the combat scenes in this really Predator and Alien kind of vibe, you know, Aliens kind of vibe that I thought he pulls off really well. And then to immediately jump to that perspective of the folks sitting in the operations center where the war looks like a completely different beast to them until they can actually put sensors on and start seeing what's happening. It all wraps up in that, you know, massive medevac from hell at the end, which is actually inspired by real world events. And it was inspired by a Facebook thread on Mike's Facebook page that went completely off the rails. And that's actually kind of what created the genesis for this story even too. So, you know, thanks to that Mr. Actually, who commented on one of Mike's posts once, because that's how we got here.
Yeah. Mike's Facebook is fun, by the way.
No, it's not.
Everyone should go and take it and look in on that. He's like an incredibly droll and dagger-filled writer of quips. He's nice in person, but he's really, he can be really evil in print. So anyway,
the background universe that they worked with already existed in what Peter Grant had built on a bit in Forged in Blood. You know, this is fall mating season for some of the animals. They're hungry, they're vicious, and they will eat people. You know, there's a middle of a battle, and there's rippers tearing people apart and eating them. And you know, this.
Why did the world evolve such deadly animals? And,
I mean, we've got leopards, lions, tigers. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that will eat people.
But on Graine, there's like, you know, like super coyotes and
right. They came up with that. That was neat.
The dire yote. I was particularly proud of that.
Yeah,
that was awesome.
Yeah. The best part of that story for me is that they try to come to a ceasefire so they can pull the wounded out.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about. All right. So who the other main character, another main character in the story is a local.
Yeah.
Who's who's got some terrible wounds, and Molly treats him, right? And she really fights for the ability to treat him. Let's talk about him. What's his name again? Oh, no. Anyway, he's Irish.
Right?
I remember that he's
Hanrahan,
Irish.
yep.
Yeah. Well, that was the other thing. Like, you look at the American Civil War, there were Irish units on both sides of that war. So you had kind of the same thing going on in Graine with this character, and a little bit of the back and forth between him and Sergeant First Class Owen. And yeah, Molly, she's a medic, so she treats everybody. That's kind of in the medic creed. It goes past looking at uniforms and that kind of thing. So she, the Graine in the group, just as she would, one of her own. So,
and he's had his arm blown off and he's bleeding out. So, I mean, if she didn't put a tourniquet on that thing, he would.
Oh, right. And, and this is also with her on limited medical supplies, because it's basically what she could carry in her aid bag. And, she's having to adapt and overcome as she's got several very serious casualties that she's trying to keep alive. And one of the, that's kind of a reoccurring theme throughout the stories, for having to deal with that. Even with the medevac, she gets some equipment from the medevac bird, and then immediately loses it because medevac gets shot down. So she's constantly in this, not only is she battling against the nature aspect of this, but she's also fighting for the wounded that she's trying to take care of. And unfortunately, things are conspiring against her, and she's losing these people as she goes along, having to suppress her own feelings just to keep going.
And these things are incredibly fast, ultra violent, and they're bad beasts, right? They
yeah, it was like a coyote crossed with like a predatory cat or a large cat species. So not only is it on the ground, or very quick on the ground, but it can get into the trees. And there's one scene in there where it strikes from the trees and takes out one of the point people. And it's like, man, we the whole patrol is just like, what just happened? Because it came from a direction they didn't expect.
Yeah, and it's really kind of scary when the guy that you thought was your leader, your new leader and protector, is cut in half in front of you and eaten.
Yeah,
it's like, oh, this is on me now, isn't it?
Yeah, no one was safe in this story. That's certainly true.
So yeah, it's a cool like two vision story, like double vision story. What else can we say about it that
So my favorite parts that they worked in there so well was they're trying to come to a ceasefire with the locals to get the wounded out, and they're told, okay, well, all of our units are standing down, but you understand there's a whole bunch of people here who aren't actually under our control, and they didn't like us, and they like you even less. So we got no say on what they're going to do. Yeah, the insurgents of the insurgency.
That's kind of like based on reality, is to span the control of an organized insurgents movement might not be as wide as they want people to think. I mean, you just look at Iraq, or you look at Afghanistan, or you look at Syria, for Pete's sake. And even if you think back to, the troubles in Ireland and the Anglo-Irish War, which was kind of a big inspiration for me working on this, is because you had the Provost, you had the real Irish Republican Army, you had Sinn Féin, and not everybody is necessarily aligned or respects the operational control of the other. So the idea of going there with, hey, not everybody who's fighting on the Freehold, even if they're against the UN, they're not necessarily for the Freehold government. So I figured we thought that was a really good kind of real world analog to suck into it, because it kind of keeps it gives that sense of reality of the way how ugly those wars can really be, and how complicated they are, and especially, as Mike has been fond of pointing out in the past, when you have sophisticated bad guys, sophisticated factions going at it. These aren't natives in huts here. These are technologically advanced societies that are just up in the ante against each other in terms of the degree of violence and what they're willing to do. Then you add on top of that, like, an environment which lets you write very cool action scenes that are reminiscent of some very cool action movies, and it's a heck of a callback. Then it's a good potent mix.
Well, the story's a lot of fun. And speaking of predators, let's talk about a few of these Williamson stories that are in there. The Humans Call It Duty is one of my all-time favorite Mike Williamson stories. And it's the fact that there are these horrible creatures on Graine is the reason that leopards are brought in, right? It's because
that's part of it. Yeah. Leopards are highly intelligent. There's even some that have disabled traps that were set for them. The Mujapurag leopard in India had like 300 confirmed kills. And this is in India where they don't keep very good records, so they have no idea how many people it killed. But it would kill dogs, it would kill cows, it would kill people. The kids are walking home from school and the last kid in the line disappears and nobody sees anything. And eventually they had an entire army regiment hunting it, a professional hunter. They had traps. And this thing was disabling traps, turning over the bodies that were used to bait it, eating parts of the body except for the poisoned parts, and then getting back out without getting caught. Hair trigger, leg traps, nooses, everything. And it's like you're waiting for the thing to show up with lockpicks and come into the door. So I'd read about some of those animals, and it's like, well, this takes it a level above a working dog. It's got better sense of smell, better vision. It's used to operating independently, and there's always someone who can convince themselves, "Oh, nice doggy," but you hear a leopard go, and you realize it's going to eat your face. There's no nice doggy.
And the story is in leopard point of view, which is very cool.
Right. I wrote that for Joe Haldeman's Future Weapons of War anthology way back. I put it in my universe. And
this
yeah,
is one of your first stories that you've ever.
Well, yeah, actually, I'd written it. I think I'd originally written it before that and adapted it for that. It was one that got rejected by several magazines. It's a simple story of revenge and killing. Like, well, this isn't a human being. This is a leopard with a leopard's perspective. And he's part of an intelligence gathering team. He can sneak in places the humans can't, especially if their sensors are optimized to detect people but not animals.
Mm-hmm.
And then they kill the handler, and now the leopard is
they shouldn't have done that
without a handler.
That's right.
Yeah.
He shouldn't have killed his buddy. It's
yeah,
not even his buddy so much as
he takes it personally. Yeah. Yeah, as a leopard would.
It's a leopard attachment he has to this guy.
Mm-hmm.
So you also bring in your sort of sub universe of Ripple Creek into this.
Yeah, because that's actually the main Ripple Creek stories are halfway between now and then. And there's a reference to that in the previous anthology, but we didn't have room to put the story in, and I get it finished. But
this story is called Bidding War, and
mm-hmm.
it is it references something I seem to remember from Resistance about the Assassin's Guild. Is that
the Professional Duelists Association?
The Duelists Association.
Yeah, the Assassin's Guild. Yeah. And the Ripple Creek team are high-end security people. It's thousands of dollars a day to hire them, and with transport being an issue out of system, they're running out of contracts, and they're in the position where they really don't want to take contracts from the UN because that will piss off the people they have to live with.
Because they're based on
this section is, yeah. They can't take contracts with the locals because that'll piss off the invading force, but they've got bills to pay. They need some source of income, and they have to decide, so do we have loyalties here? Are we neutral but combatants? What are we? And there's a couple of people who have large amounts of money offered for certain bureaucrats. Because there's no reason the bureaucrats should get to sit out the war and let the soldiers do all the dying. That's just unfair.
Especially if they're such assholes as your character.
Some of them are, yeah.
Some of them deserve.
There's a couple of the bureaucrats we've referenced are, very honorable people trying to do the right thing. And then, some of them are just looking for the money, and some of them are purely procedural, and some are flat out assholes.
Yeah. Well, Ripple Creek is very competent in picking out the right targets usually. And so let's see what else we have. We have and they also serve, which is kind of Red Dawn ish to me.
Yeah, I've got them. Well, they're doing recon, and they see convoys moving into the area, and when the enemy is bringing in convoys, you have an opportunity to stop them before that progresses. If they get sufficiently built up, it's a much harder fight. And some of that was based on stuff I did as Op4. It's amazing where you can go with a clipboard, a hard hat, and a frown. You just look at stuff and frown and make a note on a clipboard, and if someone comes towards you, you just sort of look at them, and they're afraid that you're going to write them up. So you can do a whole bunch of stuff just with the right attitude.
Get in places.
And get in places, and then you start fighting.
And it's a cool story. You also and there's a really moving story in here, The Price, which is a brother and sister. They're trying to take out a supply depot space station, right? Is that?
Well, they're taking out a bunch of stuff. I think that was another one I'd written before I got published with Bain, and
I've read that story before, yeah.
Or I wrote it early on, and I tried to stick too much backstory and universe into a short story. And so John Ringo came to me for a story for Citizens anthology. I took that, dusted it off, I gutted about 2/3 of it, rewrote it shorter. And then Jim Mintz was the editor for that, and called up and had some very good suggestions that tightened it up and gave it more punch. Hang on a second, I got a coughing fit. This is seasonal allergies, not the COVID.
Yeah.
But I'm afraid to cough in public because people flip out.
Yeah, I can attest you get it every year.
Yeah,
I've seen you get it even worse.
And this year it's bad. And then we're living in a construction zone as the freeway expands near us. There's dust everywhere, so it's really bad.
Yeah. Well, The Price is is really it's one of those inevitable stories about what's happened to this brother and sister as they and they're heroic, and it's a moving tale.
Yeah, this all ties into that final Hail Mary attack that pretty much brings the war to the denouement. And like, whatever you can do, wreck it. If you can survive, great, but we've got to take out all this infrastructure. Yeah. And it's got to be done in this time frame.
Well, that is where we are with this anthology. We are toward the end, and there's a lot of stories of the UN who we don't like getting their asses kicked finally after all of this.
Well, let me summarize some of those.
Sure.
Yeah. So, a story I wanted for the previous anthology was the ground's eye view of the attack happening. And that story never showed up. Yeah, we're getting close to deadline. So Jess expanded her story in that one, which was Spider's Web, to give some of that. So for this, Jamie Ibsen actually wrote that story where it's city safety, the equivalent of police and paramedics, and they're watching the attack happen and the city get invaded, and like, well, what do we do? Like, well, we start fighting. Let's organize some stuff. And it's very creative and a lot of fun. It was a neat story. And then Jonathan Graine has one of a health and safety inspection by one of the bureaucrat agencies. They're going to different space habitats and logging everything, documenting everything, and getting them under control. And the habitat is playing games with them, and it's again hilarious. But yeah, basically they everybody who's got a radio transmitter on that station picks a different role and starts playing it. There's a religious cult. There's the mining operations center. There's the favorable to the UN contingent who are hiding out. And every few hours, some of them will switch roles. They'll switch allegiances back and forth, and just drive them absolutely nuts.
It's like a psyop.
Yeah. Oh, it's
thing,
massively so.
Cool.
Jessica did Solitude. It's somebody who just wants to be left alone. He doesn't get along with people. He's had some legal issues as far as the freehold goes. And the safest thing to do is just have him at a remote station by himself, and everyone leaves him alone. And they want to socialize him and bring him into the group and make him part of society and watch some TV. And that she's the kind of person you wouldn't do that to, and that came off great. And then Jason and John Holmes they'd done one while we were wrapping up the previous one. I said, well, we did this just for fun. It's not going in there, but you can read it for a laugh. And I read it and I said, this is actually highly entertaining and lots of fun. So it's two retired Freehold Forces snipers who, and they're related to each other. One's the son-in-law of the other. And they're in a contest to see who can get the most complicated trick shot assassination of a UN troop from the furthest distance. And wait, if he backs up just a little, bang! All right, yeah, I got another meter. And they're just in this contest, and they've got an entire district's worth of troops are just living in absolute terror, because at any given point somebody's head's just going to disappear, or you're going to get center mass, or it's just nightmarish. And there's a nominally UN sniper who's watching this and going, so I see what they're doing, and I think I know who these guys are. A lot of shooters are very distinctive in their styles. And so he's kind of countering them, but he's not particularly favorable to the UN itself. Will McCaskey, I did a story for an anthology he put together with Laurel Hamilton. Actually, Jess and I both did. Had a lot of fun. And I asked if he wanted to be in this. And so he moved down into what I referenced to when the archipelagos, the South Islands, south of the main landmass. And that's where a lot of the Indonesian settlers and influence is. So these are very traditional Indonesian martial artists and veterans, and they've just sunk back into the jungle and periodically come out of the jungle and engage in some significant raid tactics. They understand that there's an occupation coming, and they're going to do everything they can to slow it down. And this needs to have a completely different culture, because the entire nations, entire planets are not all one culture. That's the easy way out in a lot of TV series. But they're a completely different culture, completely different approach, and it's lots of wet, humid jungle fighting. It's neat to have a divergent perspective there.
Cool.
One thing I wanted when we referenced the weapon earlier, you talked about how tough the training was, and when I first met Mike Massa, he referenced that. He says, "So you dialed the training down for the civilians, didn't you?" And I said, "Yeah." You go on Amazon, there's the civilians who review that are going, "Well, this training is outrageous and brutal and pointless," and the vets are going, "Well, it's a little like that." So.
Yeah. Well, it was enough for me to realize that I wouldn't have made it through what is the basic that the SEALs take called?
Buds, yeah, basic underwater demolitions.
Yeah,
Seals, yeah.
that would have been pretty cool. So, but this was even. I mean, it was a cool book. The Weapon is a great novel. Like it may be my favorite, after Freehold of the series. So.
Yeah, I did enjoy that one because of the intensity and the breadth of the viewpoint.
Well, out now is Freehold Defiance, which is this great anthology. Look, it's actual book. It's not just a picture behind me, and it's available at booksellers everywhere. And it has some great stories in it, and it's got some great Mike Williamson stuff in it, and it's just good stuff. So, Mike Williamson, Kevin Ikenberry, Jaime DiNote, Chris DiNote, and Phillip Wohlrab, thank you all so much for being with us and talking to us about Freehold Defiance.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for having us.
That was part 2 of a 2-part discussion of Freehold Defiance. Part 1 is available in last week's podcast. Here is another entry in David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Honor keeps her promise. The Solarian League. For hundreds of years they have borne the banner of human civilization, but the bureaucratic mandarins who rule today's League are corrupt and looking for scapegoats. They've decided the upstart Star Kingdom of Manticore must be annihilated. Uncompromising courage. Honor Harrington has worn the Star Kingdom's uniform for half a century. Very few know war the way Honor Harrington does. So far, hers has been a voice of caution. But now the Mandarins have committed atrocities such as the galaxy has not known in 1,000 years. They have finally killed too many of the people Honor Harrington loves. Uncompromising vengeance. Now Honor Harrington is coming for the Solarian League, and hell is riding in her wake. And now, David Weber's Uncompromising Honor.
Naval Station Ganymede. Sol System, Solarian League. This is confirmed? Admiral Meridor's Heckle asked. Yes, sir. Rear Admiral Leonard Pataloshti, Heckle's chief of staff, shook his head, his expression pale. Captain Sukatani's the duty officer. He says System Watch Command picked up the initial hyper footprints 16 minutes ago. They were right on top of Admiral Ningju's squadron, and the sensor platforms detected a massive missile launch. We don't see any of the cruiser's impeller signatures anymore. They're just gone. Shit, Heckle said flatly, then shook himself. Well, I suppose that clears up any little ambiguity about whether or not they're hostile. Pataloshti only nodded, and Heckle sighed. All right, Leonard. I guess we'd better get down to the command center. How many of them did you say we're talking about? Sukatani makes it a minimum of 350 signatures at Super Dreadnought range, sir, but he's pretty sure that's low. Total count for all types is about 600, plus 55 of what have to be freighters or transports in a separate echelon. Sukatani estimates the transport group's escort at another 16 battlecruisers and a pair of super dreadnoughts. It was his turn to sigh. I don't think this is just a raid, sir. No, Heckle agreed softly. No, I suppose not. HMS Imperator. Sol System. Ghost Rider's giving us good numbers, Your Grace. Andrea Jirowalski crossed to stand beside Honor as she gazed into the master plot. A steady stream of additional icons appeared in it as she watched. CIC makes it a total of 62 super dreadnoughts and 206 battlecruisers in Ganymede orbit, the ops officer continued, consulting her memo board. 61 cruisers, 117 destroyers and other light craft, and at least 52 tankers, colliers, and major service craft, 1 million tons or more each of one sort or another. Might be a couple more of those on the far side of Ganymede, and we don't have a hard count on deployed missile pods yet. We won't have one until the platforms get a lot closer, but we've already confirmed over 4,000. I see. Honor heard the distant note in her own voice and tasted the burning concern in Jarowalski's mind glow. She knew what caused it. She could taste the same worry in Mercedes Brigham, in George Reynolds, in Harper Brantley, and Teofil Kagari. She didn't have to taste Rafe Cardonis's mind glow to know it would have been the same. They were afraid of her, especially after the near destruction of Bethany Ningju's squadron. They were frightened of what she'd become. Even worse, they were frightened for her, and that was the truly terrible thing, because she wasn't frightened of who and what she was, and a part of her knew she should be. Too bad Scotty's not here, a voice said in the back of her brain, remembering another day on a moon called Blackbird. But then she brushed that memory aside. This was a different time and a different place, and she wanted no reminder of that day staying her hand when the moment came. She turned her head to look at her communications officer. "How long till the Hermes buoy is in position, Harper?" the distant soprano asked. "Another 29 minutes, Your Grace," Commander Brantley replied. He paused a moment, then added, "They're trying to contact us by comm laser, ma'am." "Are they?" Honor smiled thinly. "I think we'll just wait till we've delivered our other message and don't have any irritating delays. Besides," that smile turned even thinner and colder, "it won't hurt a thing to let them sweat a little before we talk to them, now will it?" "No, Your Grace, not one bit," Brantley said, and an edge of satisfaction glittered in his mind glow, clear and sharp enough to cut even through his concern for her. Central Command, NSG Able 1. Naval Station Ganymede, Sol System, Solarian League. "Still nothing, Ermolai?" Admiral Heckel asked quietly, and Captain Volodymyrov shook his head. "No, sir." Volodymyrov had been the communications watch officer when the intruders translated into N-space. "Lieutenant Watson's initial challenge went out 5 minutes after they completed their alpha translations. That's," he checked the time, 41 minutes. So they could have contacted us 27 minutes ago, and by now, they've known we're trying to talk to them for at least 22 minutes. Either way, they've had time to reply to us if they wanted to." Heckel nodded. The strangers, they had to be manties, although they had yet to activate any transponders or identify themselves, were almost exactly 19 light minutes from NSG. That was twice the improved cataphract's maximum powered range, and he doubted that spacing was a coincidence. The manties must have acquired enough cataphracts to have an excellent grasp of their maximum accelerations and burn times by now. For that matter, they had to be aware that cataphract accuracy at that sort of distance ranged all the way up from not a chance in hell to simply really piss poor, which made it an ideal range from which to open some sort of conversation with no one getting shot on either side. But if they'd wanted to talk to him, they could have been doing that for almost half an hour now. Of course, there'd be a 19-minute transmission delay built into any conversation, but sooner or later, they had to say something. He wished he was going to be happy when they did. Once upon a time, and not so very long ago actually, he would have been confident of Naval Station Ganymede's ability to stand off any attack. Enough super dreadnoughts could undoubtedly have taken or destroyed the station and all its platforms even then, but no one, except the Solarian League Navy, had possessed that many super dreadnoughts. And so, in those innocent days of yore, he would have been much more confident of a happy outcome. Under current circumstances? He glanced at the time display again. His initial report to Old Earth had gone out even before Volodymyrov had challenged the Manties, and System Watch Command sensor reports and analyses were automatically relayed to both Naval Station Mars and Old Terra. But Old Chicago was just over 46 light minutes distant at the moment, so Admiral Kingsford would only now be finding out the capital system had been invaded. It would be at least 3/4 of an hour before any response from him could get back to Heckel, and he wondered what that response would be, or if there'd be anyone here to receive it. "What's our readiness state now, Captain Tsugatani?" he asked. We're closed up at battle station, sir, Franklin Sukatani, the Central Command Duty Officer, replied. All mobile units report Readiness 1 on weapons and defenses, and most of the destroyers and cruisers have their impellers online and wedges and sidewalls engaged. The super dreadnoughts will be a while yet on that. All platforms' missile defense is also at Readiness 1, and all missile pods have been prepped and brought online. He shrugged ever so slightly. We're as ready as we're going to be, sir. And you're no more confident we're ready enough than I am, Heckle thought. Not that either of them could say any such thing. Someone get me a cup of coffee, please, he said instead, and forced a smile that looked almost natural. Looks like we may be waiting for a while. HMS Imperator. Sol System. The Hermes buoy's in position, Your Grace, Andrea Jarowalski said, and Anna glanced at the operations officer. She'd often wondered what Hamish, a stab of exquisite pain went through her with that name, had felt during his attack on Duquesne Base in Operation Buttercup. This wasn't the same, of course, and in more than one way. She doubted he'd ever truly hated even the Peeps, or any other enemy of the Star Kingdom for that matter. Not with a deep, visceral, ravening need to wreak death and destruction that burned like liquid oxygen. Not him. But she wasn't him. Launch, she said softly, and turned back to the plot. Central Command, NSG Able 1. Naval Station Ganymede, Sol System, Solarian League. Missile launch! Multiple missile launches! Lieutenant Enright McGill announced sharply. Commodore Benjamin Shulkin turned quickly toward the announcement. He and his System Watch Command personnel had been watching the Manties for over an hour now. The tension of that long wait had been more excruciating than anything he'd ever endured. The passing seconds had become a long, drawn-out water torture that he'd known had to be the worst thing that could ever happen to him. Now, as he crossed to McGill's shoulder, looked down at the lieutenant's display, he discovered he'd been wrong. 2,000 plus incoming, McGill announced. Initial velocity, 1,200 kps, accelerating at 451 kps squared. Shulkin put a hand on his shoulder and watched the vectors reach out across the display for Ganymede. Return fire, sir? Captain Sukatani asked, and Heckle nodded. You may engage, Captain, he said formally. Fire plan Agincourt. Sukatani looked at him for a moment. Then his mouth tightened and he nodded. Yes, sir. Fire plan Agincourt. He turned away, giving orders, and 15 seconds later, 120,000 improved cataphract pods belched 720,000 missiles at the Manties. Heckle watched their icons streak across the plot and looked at Padaloshti. The chief of staff looked back, then gave him a small shrug. Most of their fire plans had envisioned using their pods in much smaller numbers, in carefully planned and metered salvos. Agincourt did not. Agincourt was an all-or-nothing throw of the dice designed to put the maximum possible weight of fire, all the cataphracts Ganymede possessed, into space in a single enormous wave. They couldn't possibly manage all the birds of an Agincourt launch, even with all of NSG's enormous telemetry capability, and he wasn't surprised Sukatani wasn't happy to burn them all in a single spasm. But the cataphracts were all they had, and they had to get them off before the incoming fire ripped them to pieces still in their pods. 720,000 missiles, the next best thing to 750,000 of them, over 7,000 per target, represented a terrifying weight of metal. Yet the truth was that neither he nor Padaloshti truly expected them to accomplish much. Targeting would have been questionable at 19 light minutes under any circumstances. The range was far too great for any control link, and given the reported efficacy of Manti EW and missile defense systems, questionable was probably about to become futile, which didn't even consider the fact that the Manties were outside even Jupiter's hyperlimit. But it wasn't like he had a choice. Their own launch had made that much abundantly clear, and so did the comlink's total icy silence. They didn't even try to talk to us, he thought bleakly. Not a word. They just came in, blew Ningju's squadron to bits, and then sat there for a damned hour letting us sweat. And the whole time they were planning on this. Marador's Heckle was one of the Solarian officers who'd never bought the official line about the Mesa atrocity. He'd met several Manticoran officers, including Admiral James Webster, the assassinated Manticoran ambassador to the League, and none of them had been homicidal maniacs. He didn't know what had happened in Mesa, but he'd been certain he knew what hadn't happened, because it had been impossible to imagine those officers deliberately slaughtering millions of civilians. Now he found himself wondering if he'd been wrong, and what was about to happen to the star system of mankind's birth if he had. The Mark 23s raced away from Grand Fleet, accelerating at a steady 46,000 gravities. 6 minutes later, still more than 312 million kilometers short of Naval Station Ganymede, their impellers shut down and they drove ballistically onward at 55% of light speed. If ONI's current estimate of Manti missile performance is accurate, and it would be nice if it finally was, given the price Admiral Capriotti paid to get us the numbers, they should light off again in about 28 minutes, sir, Captain Sukatani said quietly, and Heckle nodded. Their own cataphracts would take longer. Assuming, as Sukatani said, that ONI's numbers were finally accurate, the Manti's total time of flight at 19 light minutes would be on the order of 37 minutes. The cataphract's first-stage impellers would burn out sooner and at a lower velocity, which meant their ballistic phase would be 56 million kilometers longer than the incoming birds, and that they'd require almost twice as long to cover it, 55 minutes as opposed to the Manti's 28, which meant that even though they'd fired within 20 seconds of one another, the Manti's laser heads would reach Ganymede almost 21 minutes before his cataphracts could reach attack range of them.
That was another entry in the complete audiobook serialization of Uncompromising Honor by David Weber. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com and to podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. And a big bowl of neutron star soup. Hey, a little goes a long way, with a tapas assortment featuring interdimensional kraken, along with thanks, praise, and gratitude to Kevin Ikenberry, Christopher DiNote, Jaime DiNote, Phillip Wohlrab, and Michael Z. Williamson, editor and authors of Freehold Defiance. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.